ask your opinion. No, I didn't. Okay.
What?
I didn't. I'm Roger, right? I didn't ask your opinion. I'm not interested.
Okay. That's fine.
Right, Roger. I gotta be firm with you sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So let's. We're on and done. Okay. So it is. We're back in. We're back in. I don't know what blooming year it is. We're back in 2022. What is it called that you don't even know what day it is, and you don't even know what year it is? What's that condition?
Dopiness.
Dementia.
Oh, right. Just, thanks, Pete. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So, what we're going to be looking at today is the relationship of space within archaeological sites and how that works. So, I want to do something different today to start things off. There's a site that I've mentioned called Shanindar, and it's a site that is in northern Iraq, and it's a site that was excavated in the 1950s, and it's the epitome of what modern day archaeology is about. We excavate archaeological sites, and we leave archaeology in boxes. And we might do a bit of a report on it, and then we come back decades and decades later, and we see something very significant in those boxes. So that's one thing. We also look at something very obvious. We take for granted castles. Castles are all around us. And when we go into castles, one thing that we do see is big, tall walls, little signs over there saying there's a tower and there's a drawbridge. Words like postern and portcullis and crenellations and lords like the Declares and kings like Henry VIII, and this is what we're told when we go to castles. And we're sometimes told that archaeologists excavated them and they found a cannonball, a load of pottery, and that's what we're left with. But one thing that we're aiming to do on a Wednesday at 6 o'clock is to be all here on time, which we've managed to do this evening. And the other thing that what we aim to do is to examine from a different angle what these places mean. So we're going to look at Carnarvon Castle. So we're in northern Iraq, Carnarvon Castle, right? They're all linked. And we're also going to look at a broch on the island of Rousey, the broch of Mid-How. And you might be able to see air spurting out of my mouth at this minute, but it's not actually cold here. I've got the fire on behind me. So I didn't want to discuss any more about tonight about the roundhouse that I'm building, because I want to do a little bit more work on that, and then I want to come back to that in the next few weeks. Interestingly enough, the way humans react and the way humans use space and the relationship with humans and space is not a phenomenon just followed by human beings. For example, the average sheep may wander along a hilly landscape following the same footpath day in, day out. So sheep follow lines in Tim Ingold's work. And those lines, you enter the space. Do you go on in front of you? Do you go left or right? Are you stopped by an obstacle? What's going on? How things operate within space. So I think what we need to do is, we know all about that now, and it would be good to look at some of these images in regard to a site that I've mentioned, Shanindar, in northern Iraq. It's probably completely the wrong pronunciation, but that's where I've been referring to it as for many years. So yeah, this is what we're going to look at. We mentioned the Broch at Rousey. We've got these nice images, Carnarvon Castle and Shanindar. Okay, so it's there you go, Shanindar Cave we'll go with what the abstract said. In Iraqi Kurdistan became an iconic Paleolithic site following Ralph Selensky's discovery of Neanderthal remains in the 1950s. Now, it's rather interesting that we look at a Paleolithic site, because that's something that Jess will be telling Steve about tomorrow. And it's the Paleolithic period that I covered last night in Tuesday's class. So it might be interesting to say that because we're doing prehistory around the world, we might actually look a little bit more at the Shanindar cave site. But a cave is a very, very strange type of space. It's an open space. But you can imagine a cave and these cave networks would have looked very differently in the past, and they would have acted very differently in the past. Light, darkness would have been different phenomenons, and how it worked in these spaces in the past. Do you know, it's very difficult in modern society to make the following statement: humanity is still governed by light and darkness. That can't be so. You go to somewhere like San Francisco, or you go somewhere like Dubai, and there's lights everywhere. You can work 24/7. However, when you're in the countryside, there's darkness, and there's light where you can work in the day. And in a way, the sense of space and how a cave works is dependent upon light and darkness. And also something else, the reason why we're looking at Shanindar, and we've mentioned Shanindar over the past few weeks, the sense of touch in the darkness, feelings, the other one of our senses, the sense of touch and feelings and smell and so on. When you're in darkness, the sense of smell and touch and that sort of feeling, that extra sense, the feelings around you and cold and dark, cold and warmth is a different sensation in the dark. So those are the sort of senses that guide you in dark spaces. So again, it's something that we can experience today as well. Selensky argued that some of these individuals had died in rockfalls, and controversially, that others were interred with formal burial rites, including one with flowers. Well, that's another bit of archaeology that we can do again. We're really interested in senses and how things work. Can I just say one little thing? Whether we're going to do everything that we want to do today. The sense of light and dark and the sense of that straight line and where to go left and right, how to navigate around space. This is what we're doing, how to navigate around space. Is very similar to how people are buried as well. That's that little sort of, well, not a little sentence, that sentence there now tells us about burial rites within a cave. When you think about burial rites within a cave, does the body need to be buried? When in fact, if it's going to be dark most of the time, why not just put the body on the surface? If you want to hide the body in the dark, the darkness is the sense of mystery, the sense of burying the body in itself. Now, what the hell am I on about? Well, actually, there's a burial tradition in some parts of the world. It's called sky burial, where bodies are just left within spaces, enclosed spaces, however, without the roof. So the body can see light and darkness in the afterlife, but without being covered with a great big slab or earth thrown on top of you. So when we think about this cave sort of aspect, it's very similar to the way people deal with burials around the world. Again, recent excavations have revealed articulated upper body of an adult Neanderthal located close to the flower burial location. The first articulated Neanderthal discovery over 25 years. So we're working there in the 1950s, and we've actually come back all these years later. So stratigraphic evidence suggests that the individual was intentionally buried. Why is it such a big deal that people were actually buried in the period of the Neanderthals 50 odd thousand years ago? But in many things in archaeology, we're very, very much learning. We're children in the aspects of archaeology. You know, we like to think that we know everything in archaeology, but we can't know everything because things are changing all the time with new archaeological techniques to understand this interesting area of Neanderthal burial. So Neanderthal burial in this sense, what we're really interested in is how a certain individual amongst the Shannon-Dar burials worked and lived throughout his life with severe disability. This person, Shannon-Dar 1, one of the burials found in the 1950s, we know was blind for practically all of his life, but was still able to live in a harsh, alien world of darkness, but lived nonetheless, being looked after by other people. Another sense of cultural assimilation, looking after other people. But then again, there's only so much other people can do. So actually, being able to navigate around a dark space, a cave for somebody who's blind, this is going to sound as a terrible statement. A cave for somebody who's blind is a perfect place to live. And the reason why I'm saying that is that somebody who's blind can get familiarity with a cave, where somebody who is has got all their sight would struggle within the darkness of a cave without a torch. You know, somebody who's blind would know that over there's a space that you don't go, and over there's a little bit of a drop. Right over there, you can lie down. This side that you can leave the cave. All these different interesting things that a blind person can get to grips with, where an able-bodied, easy-sighted person can't get to grips with easily. Let's have a little look at more of these images. So we'll just take that one off there. Now this is Shannon-Dar 1, skull and skeleton. The skeleton looks quite normal, but this is actually a Neanderthal. Doesn't look like a Neanderthal, but that heavy eye bridge there is actually Neanderthal characteristic, right? So Neanderthals have bigger skulls. They're a lot more prominent in their bones, sort of more acutely larger rib bones and so on. If you could all bear with me a minute, I just gotta plug this thing in a second. Bear with me. And I hope my voice isn't sounding too droll, but I'm in one of those droll moods. I do my Tuesday evenings and get very excited, and on a Wednesday I like to calm myself down. So this when I well, just have a little look at these images a minute. Quite looking normal, but archaeologists eventually started to realize that Shannon-Dar 1 is very different than Shannon-Dar 2. So this is a really, really powerful point. So what we're going to do, we're going to move away from these images a minute, stop the screen sharing, and I'm going to tell you what my notes tell me, which is absolutely fascinating and riveting. The archaeology that we can only understand now. And this is that cave, Shannon-Dar cave. So you can imagine that 50,000 years ago, that the front part of the cave as would be much more pronounced, and there would be more of a sense of darkness and more of a sense of needing light and torches to light your way within the cave. So this is a different aspect from what an able-bodied sighted person would have actually seen in Shannon-Dar cave. It would have been very dark because you've got meters and meters of the front part of the cave, which is now long since gone and collapsed. And we know that as a fact because of some of the burials towards the front having rock falls on them. So we know we've lost a large amount of the cave. But this is the view as you look out at the Shenandoah Cave today, and in regards to the more recent archaeological excavations. I do believe if we go back a little bit, what we're going to do, I'm going to go on to another image. I want to show you where this place is. It's always good to have a little bit of Wikipedia when it shows you there. So this is where we are. So this is it from a distance. You can see that sort of dark area. You can see that Shenandoah Cave. There would be much more there, and there it is in northern Iraq. So I'm going to look a little bit more in regards to the body of this individual at Shenandoah Cave, and maybe it'll put some more meat on the bones, and that's definitely not a pun. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go off there, and I'm going to stop my screen share, stop the screen share. That's good. And let's get back to my notes. Okay. Right, so if I can do that. So what we've got to do, I just want to set the scene. So Ralph Selensky, who was an American, was excavating at Shenandoah Cave in the early 1950s, and 1953 came. In 1956, 1957, he made some amazing discoveries. And initially, 2 Neanderthal skeletons were found in Shenandoah Cave. And today, the depth of the cave is 130 feet in depth. But back then, you could probably add about another 70 feet to that. So you can imagine that it would have been quite dark, particularly towards the rear, and in most of the cave at most times as well. But one thing that we do say about caves, as we opened with, there are times that if you get enough light, the light can be illuminated, not just by the sunlight, but sometimes by moonlight as well. So this was the point I was trying to make. So overall excavation found the remains today of 8 adults and 2 infant Neanderthals, dating from as far back as 65,000 years ago. Now they are Neanderthals. And the one point about this is that when they were excavating, they found various bits of evidence of scrapers and flakes and evidence of wild goats and spur-thighed tortoises, all these little bits of evidence. And they went there. So you had the initial 2 discoveries, Shenandoah 1 in 1956. Selensky went back there 1957 and 1961 as well, finding more bones. Nobody did anything there until 2006. So yeah, and it's only now that we really understand Shenandoah 1, and we've seen his skull. And understanding Shenandoah 1. So Shenandoah 1, we've got a rough estimate. Unfortunately, dating archaeological evidence dating back this period of time is fraught with problems. So we do believe the body. There is actually a new radiocarbon dating technique now, which stretches the boundaries of radiocarbon dating a lot further back, right? But I don't think that's been tested out on this. So roughly, Shenandoah 1 dates from between 60 and 45,000 years ago. But that's a bloody long time ago, may I say. Shenandoah 1 was an elderly Neanderthal male known as Nandi to his excavators. When you think about an elderly Neanderthal male, he was some say up to 50 years old. Now, in the context of a Neanderthal, the context of anyone back then, 50 years old is quite an age. Actually, it's quite an age to live with the traumas that we found associated with the bone record of Shenandoah 1 of Nandi himself. So we had the usual typical cranial capacity of a Neanderthal, which was 1,600 cubic centimeters, was around, the individual was my height. So you all know my height. So he was my height, about just probably around just over 5'7". Actually, the same, I do believe Napoleon was that height as well. And he displayed many signs of deformity. And he was one of 4 reasonably complete skeletons from the cave which displayed trauma-related abnormalities. So he wasn't the only one that had abnormalities, but this was the one who had painful, debilitating abnormalities, which would have made day-to-day life very painful. So let's just chuck this in there. During the course of the individual's life, he had suffered a violent blow to the left side of his face, creating a crushing fracture to his left orbit, which would have left him partially or totally blind in one eye. Research by Jan Letava shows that the individual exhibited atypical worn teeth, severe changes to the individual's incisors, and a flattened capitulum show additional evidence towards Shenandoah 1 suffering from a degenerative disease. So he had degenerative disease as well. So we'll go on to his complete blindness in a minute. Additionally, analysis shows that Shenandoah 1 likely suffered from profound hearing loss. So not doing well. And his left ear canal was partially blocked, and his right ear canal was completely blocked. So he was deaf as well. Whew. He also suffered from a withered right arm, which had been fractured in several places. A fracture of the individual's vertebra, one of his vertebra is thought to have caused damage to his muscular function. So in other words, he struggled to move. Shenandoah 1 healed, but this caused the loss of his lower arm and hand. This is thought to be either congenital, or a result of childhood disease and trauma, or due to an amputation later in his life. It's not doing well. The sharp point caused by a distal fracture of the individual's right humerus points towards this theory of amputation. If the arm was amputated, this demonstrates one of the earliest signs of surgery on a living individual. But he survived within that cave. It's absolutely amazing. The arm had healed, but the injury may have caused some paralysis down his right-hand side. So what you need to do is write this up and work out what he looked like. Studies show that this individual has suffered from 2 broken legs. It's just not doing well, is he? This would have resulted in him walking with a pronounced painful limp. These findings in Shenandoah 1 skeleton proposed that he was unlikely to be able to provide for himself in a Neanderthal society. So we're talking about a massive loss of hearing, basically not being able to hear. And we're talking about that he's been the diagnosis of everything on the individual would make Shenandoah 1 the oldest hominid specimen, clearly presenting that he had systematic problems, which would have required him to be looked after. You know, some people have argued that he was completely blind. If this was the case, then it goes back to everything that I've said at the beginning, that how this person lived in a cave like that is really difficult, but survived for nearly 50 years and was able to move around in that cave. And I think that's absolutely amazing. And it's a sign that the other thing about all this is that the Neanderthal society was actually looking after him. That he was an individual within Neanderthal society. You know, he's being looked after. There's no way he could have survived with all those problems. Problems with all his limbs, being deaf, Some say completely blind, obviously losing the sight of one of his eyes completely, problems with his teeth. It's almost as if it's very difficult to get a grip with the pain that Shenandoah 1 was actually in, but pain nevertheless. So what we're probably going to do in the future with our main classes is that probably visit Shenandoah Cave and look at some of the other skeletons. But one of the things is that we've got evidence that this individual being able to move around the cave must have been a specialist in moving around caves. He must have learned how to avoid a fire, how not to be able to listen because he was profoundly deaf. And if he had any sight at all, it would have been pointless anyway, because he wouldn't have been able to see much anyway in the cave because it would have been dark. So I believe that there's so much we can learn from this individual, and he lived for nearly 50 years. I think that's absolutely amazing. And most of these problems were with him for more or less his complete life. So, it's something really important, and we will come back to this individual. So if anyone's got any questions, we'll leave all these questions for the end. Or if anyone sort of want to, no, what we won't, because we've got two other areas to look at. We'll find out. Has anyone got any questions about Shenandoah 1 at this stage?
Yeah,
Well, if it was a residential cave, surely they wouldn't have left the bodies in a residential cave.
No, that's a really interesting point. Very, very interesting point. So to answer that question, what we need to do, we need to say, right, what is the evidence for what is the evidence for other things going on in a cave? And it's talking that this was a cave of burials. We've got 8 adults, and we've got two sort of babies, infants. But there is one thing about this, Pete, is that these bodies are being placed into the cave over a long period of time. So if we want to, Pete, let's just go outside the box a minute, right? And let's look at some burials in the Central American context, where what you have human remains buried within people's houses. And they would be buried inside people's houses. You've also got the tradition of mummification as well. And it's not impossible to perceive living within a cave where people are buried. But this is not a charnel house, Peter, that there's thousands of bodies in the cave. These are occasional burials. So I'm
were
going to
they actually buried?
Say that
if
again,
it's a
Pete?
rock cave, it'd be very difficult to bury anything, surely.
Now, this is a very, very important point. This is a very, very important point. You know, when I said earlier on about, I mentioned about, I mentioned about this place being dark, and do people really need to be buried anyway? And what we've got is evidence of a rock fall and just bodies just left under the rock fall because somebody had died. And the other thing as well is just trying to work out, when you look at Chaco Canyon and you Mesa Verde, no, not Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde. In Mesa Verde, what you've got the houses, and you've got at the back of the caves. You've got all the refuge and all that type of stuff, and in lots of contexts we don't know where the bodies are, right? But there are some remains in those areas, and you've got to think about the fact that this burying individuals in this type of landscape is very different than burying individuals in the Western Hemisphere. If you bury if you've got a burial in the Western Hemisphere where it's damp and the body's going to start to smell and it's going to attract all sorts of bugs and critters. In the context of a cave like this, if you're going to be burying the body in sort of semi-arid conditions, then you're not going to be attracting all the sort of ruminants and so on that might eat away at the body in the first place?
Of course it would.
In lots of cases, no, because what we do see, Peter, is that lots of these bodies are very intact, are very, very intact. Listen to this one, Peter. I wasn't going to do this. Shannon Dar 2 was a Neanderthal male around the age of 30 who had suffered from slight arthritis, found lying on his right side. He's thought to be quite short, actually, 5'2". He was killed by rocks falling from the cave ceiling, which crushed his skull and bones significantly. So in other words, his body was just left there. However, Pete, interestingly enough, Pete, where we don't see any evidence on Shannon Dar 1 being scavenged, there's evidence of this one being partly scavenged. So you've got some that show signs of just being buried and buried with flowers and all sorts of bits and pieces, but others that died by complete accident, and over a period of time their bodies feasted upon. So you've got both aspects there. Some, when you said, of course they would have been scavenged, some cases they weren't, other cases, in this case, it was. So you jumped into that one, Pete, when you were right. So well, anyone else?
Some of them may have been treated in such a way to deter the predators.
And that's a good point as well. That is a very, very good point. That is a very, very good point. As we know, there are certain things that that certain ruminants are not really, they avoid, for example. And that's a good point, Pete. This could also be the point that the flesh and all the soft tissues have already been removed, so there's nothing much to feast upon anyway. Which animal wants to gnaw upon a bone with just flesh on it when all the other stuff has been taken away? So you've got all those things to look at, Pete.
Yeah,
you do. You really do. You really do. Right. I do believe Steve wants to say something.
Presumably this was because of the timescale. This is over a very, very long period of time in terms of these bodies have been found. So they're not necessarily all connected. Within a tribe or a family, it could have been that they died over a long, long period of time, and it so happened that there was a rockfall that he was in the cave on his own. Is there much evidence that it was continuously used as a dwelling?
Well, the thing is, what we've got 1 and 2. We've got another one here. Shannon Dar 3, for example, was nearly 50 years old as well. Lots of these people are fairly old, but the previous one was not fairly old. But you've got the Shannon Dar 1 50, the second one 30, and this next one, Shannon Dar 3, that's found in 1957. This one showed signs. This is a rather interesting one. This one showed signs of being injured, and it's there's a problem with this one. There's actually signs that he may have been deliberately injured in some violent action, but somebody's actually arguing that he may have injured himself. But he also had a degenerative joint disorder as well. So this is a problem with these 3 individuals. Have got problems with them, and there's another one here that. These bodies are being buried over a very long period of time, as we've established. Shannon Dar 4, for example, we found that this individual lived. If we read this one, Shannon Dar 4 was thought to provide strong evidence for a Neanderthal burial ritual. So this one was buried with some kind of ritual. Routine soil samples from around the body gathered for pollen analysis in an attempt to reconstruct the paleoclimate, what the climate was like back then, a vegetational history of the site, were analysed 8 years after its discovery. In 2 of the soil samples in particular, whole clumps of pollen were discovered, in addition to the usual pollen found throughout the site, suggesting that entire flowering plants had been part of the grave deposit. Furthermore, a study of the particular flower types suggest that the flowers may have been chosen for their specific medicinal properties. That might tie in with what Pete just said. But you've got lots of different flowers actually being buried with the individual, which offer an aspect of specialness, whether it's shamanic or whether it's, as Pete said, to deter rodents, or whether it's because people want to put flowers there. And the other thing as well is what we've got. Recent evidence also tells us that that little gerbil-like creatures were active within the cave, and it's talking about deliberate placement of flowers as being, some say it's part of a seasonal thing. Other people think it is deliberate. So you've got all these things, and I've got what the question was now, Steve.
It was really just to see what are the connections between these individuals. So it's over times. It's not.
There might be no. Yeah, there might be no connection at all.
Exactly.
There might be no connection at all, but the one thing is this individual, the first one. There's no way this in my mind, there's no way Shannon-Dar 1, that Shannon-Dar 1 must have lived in that cave or must have lived in a similar cave, because Shannon-Dar 1 would not have been able to live out in the open, because they would just be cannon fodder, and anything would be able to sack Shannon. The thing is, Shannon-Dar 1, if you got Shannon-Dar 1 out in the open, there'd be somebody inactive having to keep an eye on that Shannon-Dar 1 24/7. Where Shannon-Dar 1 living in a cave would have probably been relatively safe. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh God, we've definitely done a bit on Shannon. I am actually going to be looking at Shannon-Dar 1 in a month's time, not with the Wednesdays, but we will be looking at. But I think the point is, what I wanted to do is the relationship with Shannon-Dar 1 having a disability with the space and all the rest of it. So obviously settling that space, and people you were right. We've done the relationship of, did any of these people have a relationship? And the point is, if Shannon-Dar 1 was buried about 200 years before Shannon-Dar 2, then there is no relationship. They just happen to be Neanderthals living in that area who use the cave occasionally or all time, and it's a special cave. In fact, it's the same. Peter's got no relationship with the person that used to own his house, right? But Peter's a human being, and so was the person before. It's the same as talking about Shannon-Dar 1. I presume that's correct, Pete. Right, anyway, so what I'd like to do now is I would like... Go on, Rog.
One thing I'm curious about, how did they know they were blind? He was blind. I mean, Shannon-Dar 1.
Right, okay, we'll just go back to that point as well. So... okay, what we've got is we've got that discussion of a violent blow to the left side of his face, creating a crushing fracture to his left orbit, which would have ruptured the eye anyway, which would have caused total blindness in that eye in particular. So that's the point. And there's other signs that he was actually completely blind as well. So it's all
that injury have caused his death.
No. It healed. No, it healed. That's the point. No, the injury didn't cause his death. It healed because the bone had healed. Do you know that there was one thing the other day? Let me work this out. We actually looked at this yesterday. Not yesterday. I found it myself. There was a skull that had some. It was Central American. It had a silver plate that had been fused onto the skull, right? and the skull was completely fractured on the one side, but all the bones had fused, and the bones had actually fused onto the silver plate. So people can survive severe trauma to bones as long as or if you set and you deal with the trauma straight away, to offset any primary or secondary infection. Anyway, let's crack on, because there were two other areas that I wanted to look at. So I'm going to, I don't think we've got screen sharing at this minute, so I'm just going to get rid of that there. So the next thing we're going to look at is again the relationship of space and how space actually works. This is sort of today's a little bit of a way back in to sort of show you, to illustrate how things work and how things move around. Right, so let's just let's go to screen sharing, and we're going to look at Carnarvon Castle next. This is quite an eclectic mix. And there we go. We're going to go there now, and okay, we're sharing the screen. Okay. I don't know if anyone's actually visited Carnarvon Castle, but yes, I'm glad you all have. And you all know about the investiture in 1969 and all the rest of it, so that's good. So the one thing about Carnarvon Castle is that it demonstrates the relationship with space and area very, very well. Like Harlech Castle. Caerphilly's a bit confusing, to be honest with you, but these new castles that were being built after 1282 and into the 1290s, these castles were not just to show off. They were castles that were meant to control and to dominate movement. Now, if we have a look at a plan, and I'm just going to be very, very wary of time now. This is looking at a plan of Carnarvon Castle. Now, the one thing that you do have with Carnarvon Castle is that you do have on one side itself, you do have that the water itself, can get my words out there, the water itself offers a natural defense to Carnarvon Castle itself, and then you've got a moat around it. Now, in the sort of rules of moving around and this sense of space, water washes that away, because naturally you've got a moat around it. Now, the likes of Carnarvon Castle were being very much constructed at a time when all other methods of controlling the good old population of Cymru had actually failed. So what they wanted to do was to build a new wave of castles that when a bit of the castle's captured, then the rest of the castle can actually defend itself, right? So it's a castle within a castle. Each of these towers, which if we look at that, each of these towers, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, in effect 11 towers. Each of these towers can be defended by themselves until help comes. And the other thing as well is, with this new wave of castles, these castles are built on castles that were being constructed on in the Middle East, for example. And what you've got this hexagonal style of this hexagonal style of tower. And if you want to attack this castle, the main traditional space that you need to actually capture is actually the main gateway, which in effect is 2 towers. And you've got to there's the gateway. You need to get into the gateway right now. by entering the gateway, you're naturally hit with two areas. You've got an inner ward and an outer ward, basically two sort of courtyard areas. So even when you've actually managed to get through the gateway, you've actually got to deal with all these other towers that can be, which can actually defend themselves. And when in some respects, when some of these towers actually have things called postern gates. So if a tower is actually surrounded and people could still get in and out, they don't need to have access to the main gateway. So this is how space is actually working. This is everybody's being controlled. So even actually looking at a castle like this, you're thinking, my God, that's a massive wall. How am I going to get in? Right? What is the wall saying to us? Because even before you actually get to this castle, there's a town wall on the left and the right of it. So you've actually got to get into the town. You've got this wall up around you, and then you've got this sort of little bit of a drawbridge over a moat, and then you've got to get into the gate, get through the gateway, and then when you get into the gateway, you've got to get into the inner ward, and after you've managed to capture the inner ward and all those other towers, you've got to get into the outer ward. And the interesting thing is, the other interesting thing as well with Carnarvon Castle is if you look over there, it says D being a water gate, right? And you've got here E on Tower 2 being a postern. And the whole point is if this main part of the castle has been captured, this part of the castle can actually continue on because it can actually be supplied by the sea. So castles now in the 1280s, 1290s are getting really, really complicated affairs. They've got so complicated that it's not just as straightforward as actually getting into a castle and saying you captured it. It's now getting into a castle and having to capture each and every one of these towers. And as you're trying to capture each and every one of these towers, you're taking on casualties every single step of the way. Do you know? I want to show you an image and something somebody told me years ago, and I never actually believed this. Hang on, let's just go on to Caerphilly Castle. I need a ground plan of Caerphilly Castle. Let's just. I wasn't going to do this. This is why I haven't got an image up there. So Caerphilly. Just want to make a point. And this sort of encapsulates how violently new these castles actually are. Okay, is that going to help me? Oh yeah, that'll do. Let's just go with that one there. Come on. Right. Okay. Well, that's that, as we know, is Caerphilly Castle. Right, and if you go to Caerphilly Castle today, the one thing that you will know is it's still surrounded by a moat. Much of what you do see at Caerphilly Castle was rebuilt in the late 1800s because it was owned by Marquis of Bute, and it was big chunks of the outside facing was actually had to be put in there because lots of it had been stolen to build the town. But I remember I must have been about the age of 10. One of the tour guides, he took us around Caerphilly Castle and he said, you could probably defend this castle with 12 men. And I said, you know what? You could probably defend it with 12 men. And I thought, that what? I don't really get that. And actually, years later, I was doing some research and there was actually a garrison at Caerphilly Castle, which wasn't hundreds of men strong, was actually 36. You had to pay the garrison at Caerphilly Castle on a regular basis. And forget about the 12, but even 36 men spread over this castle, you'd think, how the hell would they be able to defend this castle with just 12 men or 36 men? And it's quite easy because if you position the men, position the men in the right way, you might have one or two. The front barbican there, which is that structure in the front, the left hand side there, the entranceway, that's called the barbican, which is the outside defense. So before you actually get into that first gateway, you've got to get through the Barbican. So you've captured the Barbican, right? One of the defenders is now dead, or he's run over the bridge. So you've got that gateway, and then when you're in the gateway, you've got a couple of archers up in the gateway, and there's hundreds of you, and a few of you are dead before you even get into the gateway. So when you've actually got through the portcullis and you've actually got into the gateway area, guess what you've got to deal with? You've not only got to contend with having to deal with these structures, you've now got to get over another drawbridge. So if you then manage to get over the other drawbridge, guess what you've got? You've got another area, another killing ground before you've got that tower. You see what I mean? This is getting exhaustive. So, and then you're inside this sort of central part, but then again, right? Then again, as a last resort, you've got this area at the back as well. This is the Bailey area. This is where everyone would have stayed, and we think that we got evidence that this was actually where there was original Roman fort. But the point I'm trying to make, the whole point of access and the whole point of moving forward, and it's a sense of control. Stephen, you might not think it, that everything in your house is based upon the design of a castle, because your front door is a solid door, right? So I don't know what your house is like, Steve, but we'll just make it up, right? So you go in through, you've got a front door, right? And you've got a lock on your front door, which acts as a defense to stop people getting in. Usually when you get in through the front door, you've got a corridor, and you've got to make a decision when you get into the corridor, whether you go up the stairs, which you could think is another defensive area, or you go left or right and you go into the kitchen or the living room, right? You've got all these windows in your house which open and close. That's all based on this sort of idea of defense. It's idea of control. Steve, Peter, myself, and Roger, we are very controlling people, because we've got houses with corridors, and we've got houses with doors, and we've got houses with doors with locks on them, right? All of these are there to control and to stop movement of people. Your front door is to stop the movement of people. It's based on this principle of castles. Years ago, I don't know if this is ever the case in Barry, but you often hear about in the valleys that people used to leave their front doors open, and you could just go in and out people's houses, and people just used to leave their front doors open, right? So that's not very controlling. You can go into somebody's house because they left the front door open in the summer, and you can just wander around and make yourself a cup of tea and go, right? That's very, very different than Caerphilly Castle. So what I'd like to do now is that we're going to be breaking into the Jessica's class, but we're not going to worry about that. And what I want to do now is show you, right, another image. Right, I want to take us to another part of the world. So we've done a bit of Caerphilly Castle. We could get rid of those now. I want to go to this site just for about five minutes, right? But before we do those 5 minutes, is there anything that I've picked on, Steve? Now, is there anything you want to say, Steve?
Nothing else from me, thank you.
Right, Steve, would you think your house is very controlling and defensive?
Yes, it is.
Right, okay, well, let's answer the question. It's good to be right. What about you, Peter? All right, sod, Peter. All right, Pete, just talk over the bells. Go on.
Hang on. No.
I'll go. Pete, you know your garden, right?
Yeah.
How easy is it? How easy is it to get into your garden, your back garden?
Well, I've got a locked side gate, so it makes it difficult.
Right, so can you get in from the back garden into your garden? Because I know there's a stream behind your house, isn't there?
No, there used to be. It's not any longer.
Right, would it be easy for me to get into your back garden?
No.
Right, so basically you've got a defence there, and and am I right in thinking that stream is like a ditch?
There was a ditch which came down the side of my garden.
Yeah.
And joined the brook, which goes down to the which originally came down through Cold Brook.
Yes. So there you go. You've got defensive and controlling houses, whereas when you think about it, there are, you know, you can think of that there's tribal people like the Messi the Messi people from Kenya. I got that. Yeah, couldn't get the pronunciation. They've got a different way of looking at the sense of space. It's all communal. You know, the only reason why you've got a barrier in the doorway is to stop a lion wandering in. It's not to stop a person coming in. Everybody is part of the community, so it's a different way of looking at things. There's no sense of ownership. This is the thing. There is no sense of ownership in some tribal people of the world, where because we've got a sense of ownership, we've got to have that sense of space, them and us. And when we got them and us, it is a sense of ownership and control. So I'm just gonna double check to see who's actually waiting in the. Oh, we'll just let anyone join us. That'll be all right. Let's just look at this little mid. So this is Mid How Rousey. I love this site, and maybe what we could do is look a little bit more about this next week. But I just want to show you a couple of images. It's by the sea. It's on the island of Rousey. It overlooks Rousey itself is one of the islands directly north of the mainland of Orkney, right? And it's opposite something called the Brocha Gurnes, right? Which I think I've been there with Pete and the gang. Anyway, you've got Midhow and the Brocha Gurnes, and they're opposite each other. Now, they're very, very similar in one key aspect, right? And that key aspect is this. A broch itself is a big tower. Some brochs themselves, the one at Musser on the island of just off the Isles of Shetland, on the island of Musser, is actually was believed to have been about 15 meters in height. Today, it's still 13 meters in height. Huge conical type towers that look like cooling towers. Now, the one thing about these sites, hang on, nobody is joining us by the looks of it. The one thing about these sites is that they control the space. So before you actually, you've got a big ditch around the outside, right? These little white bits are ditches, right? And these brown bits are like banks and so on. So you've got a ditch around the outside, a stone cut ditch. Coastline 1937. Well, actually, the coastline has ingressed onto the site, so it would have been a complete ditch around the outside. So what you've got this tower in the middle, and to get to the tower, you've actually got to go through the village. I know that sounds obvious, but you can't get to the tower without passing a series of ditches and a series of banks, without passing through the village itself. And then and only then do you actually get to the tower. And when you do get to the tower, right? So if we go to the other image, when we do get to the tower, inside you've got a series of ways into the building. Now you can either go as you go in, you've got a cuppy down, right? And you've got a cuppy down, and you can either go left or right, and you can go up the stairs. There's actually it's a hollow wall, right? And then you open into a space in the middle. Now, originally, the broch of the broch of Musser and the broch of Midhow and the broch of Gurnes, the broch of Midhow that we're looking at in regards to Rosi, this itself was changed later on, right? And this is gonna sound very, very strange. When this was changed later on, it was a revolution, because up until that point, it was a large open space with a hearth in the middle and probably a water tank. Now, with a hearth and a water tank in an open space, that gave the idea that it was very, very communal. But later on, they decided to divide the building up, and the sense of space changed. And on that moment, with that, the sense of space changed. We're gonna call that a day, and we're gonna see if we've got any questions. Steve, have you got any questions on that today?
Not today, thanks, Carl. I'd probably like to go away and do a bit more work on the Midhow Broch, because I'm not aware of it, so I'll need to do a bit more research on that before we meet and talk about it again.
What we're going to do, I will put a bit more guts into the Midhow Broch next week. Okay, that's what we're going to do. Well, Midhow Broch next week will be one of the ones that we look at, and we will continue then opening up into the aspects and ideas of space. Right? Anything that you would like to say, Peter?
No, all fine, thanks.
Right. Okay, I've got to try and stop the sharing. What about you, Rog?
No, fine, thanks. Interesting.
Oh, right. Okay, that's fair enough. We've that was quite that was a good hour. We did an hour, which is brilliant tonight. So
You did well.
Oh, thank you very much, Pete.
Even with your scruffy look.
I'm glad we did well tonight, Pete. I'm really pleased that you approve of that, Pete. I really am.
With your scruffy look, who could have?
Well, hey, I gotta be honest with you. I'm gonna say it. People with hair like me and Steve, Pete, right? We don't need to chuck stones at glass houses. You got the glass house, Pete. So don't have a go at my hair. So okay then. What we're gonna do? If there's no more questions on that tonight, you've been a nice group tonight, and I'm gonna say. If there's no more questions from Roger and Steve and wonderful Pete, I look forward to seeing you three next week, and obviously Bill will be back and Richard will be back next week as well. Anyway, thanks for that, Rog. Thanks for that, Steve.
Okay,
nice to see you all. And thanks to you, Pete. Take care. Night. Night, you three. That's been good. Thank you, gang. Thank you, gang.
Am I having a class now?
Well, you're having a class, yeah. Of course, you're having a class.
Oh, with Jessica.
Yeah, well, yeah, with Jessica, yeah. What I'm going to do, so I got to end it was recording anyway. Thank you, everybody, for watching the Relationship of Space. So please like and subscribe, and obviously join if you so wish. So we're going to stop the live stream. Keep watching. There'll be more next week. A bit of enthusiasm there about Midhow and the on the Island of Russi in Orkney.